The Pope just gave Silicon Valley its oldest warning. Not about robots, not about killer machines, not about whether AI can pass another benchmark, about Babel, the Tower of Babel. And it should get every enterprise leader's attention. Because the warning is not really about a tower. It is about what happens when shared language becomes organized power. In the ancient story, a common language allowed people to coordinate, build, scale, and pursue a project larger than any one person could control. Today, AI is creating a new kind of common language inside institutions. It reads the messy material of enterprise life: policies, contracts, complaints, claims notes, supplier updates, employee concerns, audit findings, and regulatory guidance. Then it turns that language into labels, summaries, scores, recommendations, and next steps. That sounds useful. It is useful. But it also means AI does not have to make the final decision to shape the outcome. Sometimes it only has to decide what kind of problem the institution thinks it is solving. Hi, my name is Vlad Stanovsky, and this is the Sovereign AI Enterprise, where I examine how AI is changing the operating model of institutions, how they interpret risk, move work, assign responsibility, and exercise power. Today, I want to talk about what happens when AI turns language into infrastructure. A useful way to think about this is social media, but with a sharper edge. Social media gave everyone a voice. AI gives people and systems operational language. It does not only let institutions publish or persuade, it lets them summarize, classify, route, recommend, and act. That is why the Tower of Babel metaphor matters now. The issue is not only language. It is language becoming executable. The enterprise version of Babel will not announce itself as a rebellion against God or a machine takeover. In the enterprise, Babel will not look like a tower. It'll look like routine work. A supplier sends an update. The delivery date has not changed. The price has not changed. The contract terms look intact. No one writes the words urgent or escalations. The AI reads it, summarizes it, and labels it routine. Then procurement moves on. Legal never sees it. Compliance never gets the exception. Operations assumes continuity. And nobody notices that the supplier has a new parent company, a new subcontractor, and a new data processing location. The shipment may still arrive on time, but the risk may have changed completely. Sanctions exposure, data transfer risk, forced labor compliance, cybersecurity obligations, or geopolitical dependency. The AI did not make the final decision. It did something quieter. It framed the issue. And that is the risk I want to talk about today. Because most enterprise AI governance focuses on the action. Can the AI approve or deny something? Can it route a case or update a record? Those are important questions, but they may come too late. Because before AI acts, it interprets. It reads messy human language and turns it into labels, summaries, categories, scores, recommendations, and next steps. That translation can shape the outcome before anyone thinks a decision has been made. Recently, Pope Leo XIV used one of the oldest images of human ambition to talk about artificial intelligence, the Tower of Babel. Regardless of whether you are religious or not, the metaphor is useful. The Tower of Babel story is not only about people building upward, it's about what a common language made possible. Shared language allowed people to coordinate, scale, build, and pursue our collective project with extraordinary force. The tower was the visible artifact. The deeper force was the combination of common speech, shared ambition, and organized work. And that is why the metaphor matters for AI. AI is not just learning to speak, we're way past that moment. The more important shift is that AI can now turn language into action. It can read policies, contracts, complaints, claims notes, supplier updates, audit findings, regulatory compliance, and employee concerns. Then it can turn that language into categories, flags, recommendations, and next steps. That changes the role of language inside institutions. Language used to explain work. Now it can help drive it. That is the enterprise Tower of Babel. Not a tower built from stone, but a system that turns institutional language into labels, recommendations, and workflow steps. Here's the practical version. For decades, enterprise systems could not really act on messy language directly. They needed structure, forms, fields, status codes, routing rules, approval chains, systems of record. Contracts defined obligations, policies set limits, support tickets captured frustration, and claims notes explained context. But the system usually needed a person to translate that language into something that could be processed. The work moved only after someone translated the language into a field, flag, review, exception, or approval path. That was the old boundary. Language sat outside the machinery until a person translated it into something the system could use. AI changes that boundary. A model can read the supplier update and extract the ownership change. From there, it can check the new subcontractor against risk rules, summarize the data processing issue, classify the update as routine, material, incomplete, or requiring review, and prepare the next step before a person has read the original message. That is why generative AI did not become enterprise critical just because it can write paragraphs. It became enterprise critical because it can make language computable. That is the same pressure showing up across enterprise AI. The organization itself is becoming machine readable. Code, contracts, policies, tickets, logs, supplier disclosures, audit findings, and employee concerns can now be read, summarized, classified, and routed at scale. That creates value. But it also means the enterprise has to pay closer attention to how machine readability turns into institutional action. But there's a trap. Making language computable sounds efficient, and it is. But enterprise language is not just information. It carries context, ambiguity, obligation, conflict, judgment, and risk. When AI converts that language into clean system categories, something can be gained. Speed, scale, consistency, and searchability. But something can also be lost. Context, uncertainty, competing interpretations, and the human stakes. That is where the real enterprise risk begins. Think of this as the translation layer. Not translation from English to Spanish, translation in the institutional sense. A client complaint becomes a severity level. A supplier update becomes a risk category. A contract clause becomes an obligation. A claims note becomes an exception. An employee concern becomes a case type. A security alert becomes a priority. A regulatory change becomes an implementation task. This is where AI becomes more than a writing tool. It becomes a shared interpretive layer across the institution. And the concentration of power here is not only computational, it is interpretive. Whoever controls the language layer begins to shape what the institution sees. which facts seem important, which risks seem urgent, which complaints seem severe, which exceptions seem routine, which obligations seem binding, and which labels get attached to a client, employee, supplier, patient, or applicant. That is a quieter form of power than a final automated decision. It happens before the decision, before the escalation, before the approval, and before the human review. It happens when the system turns a messy human situation into the kind of object the enterprise knows how to process. And that is why the danger is not only the wrong answer. The danger is the wrong frame. Go back to the supplier example. The model reads the update, delivery date unchanged, pricing unchanged, contract terms intact, no escalation language. So the AI produces a clean summary, no material delivery risk. That may be true, but it may also be the least important truth in the document, because the issue may not be delivery. The hidden issue may be sanctions exposure, data transfer risk, forced labor compliance, cybersecurity obligations, or geopolitical dependency. The system answered the question it was optimized to answer. Will this disrupt delivery? But the institution may have needed a different question. Did this change the risk profile? Is this now a regulated data issue? Does this require legal review? And has the supplier relationship changed? This is where enterprise AI failures may become difficult to catch. They may not begin with a wild hallucination. They may begin with a plausible frame that is too narrow. A complaint is framed as a service issue when it may be a safety issue. An employee concern is framed as a performance issue when it may be a retaliation risk. A security alert is framed as low priority when it may be part of a larger pattern. Or a client message is framed as a support ticket when it may be a strategic account warning. This is hard to catch because nothing looks obviously broken. The summary sounds reasonable, the classification looks precise, and the next step fits the workflow. The institution moves forward because the output appears orderly, even if the system framed the problem too narrowly. That is how AI can make the enterprise faster and less aware at the same time. And so by the time a person reviews the case, the system may have already shaped the question they're trying to answer. So what should enterprises do? The answer is not stop using AI to interpret language, because there are many places where AI can help, summarizing long records, surfacing obligations, comparing policies, detecting missing information, routing routine work, and helping teams move faster. The practical test is simple. Identify where translation changes consequence. An AI-generated summary may change who sees the case. A classification may change the risk tier. A severity label may change the response time. A recommendation may change the next step. And a generated explanation may become part of the official record. And one AI-generated output may become the input to the next AI-assisted step. Those are high-consequence translations. They need to be reviewable, not just as outputs, but as translations that shape what the institution does next. Call this the translation trail. For high-consequence AI outputs, the enterprise should preserve 7 things. First, the source language. The original document, email, complaint, claim note, supplier update, transcript, or policy text. Second, the extracted facts. What did the AI pull out as true? Third, the assigned label. Routine, high risk, low severity. Compliance review, escalation required. Fourth, the evidence for the label. Which passages, facts, fields, rules, or policy references supported the classification. Fifth, the uncertainty. What did the system not know? What could it not verify? And what was ambiguous? Sixth, the alternative interpretations. Could this be a delivery issue and a compliance issue? Could it be a support issue and a safety issue? Or could it be a performance concern and a retaliation risk? The seventh part is the downstream consequence. What did the label cause? Did it stop an escalation? Send the case to legal? Put the supplier into a compliance queue? Trigger a hold? Update a record? Or move the issue to executive review? That is the practical mechanism. Do not let the AI summary be the only artifact. If the system says supplier update routine, the reviewer should be able to see the original source, the facts the system extracted, the label it assigned, the evidence behind that label, the uncertainty that remained, the alternative frames it considered, and the workflow consequence that followed. That is how a human reviewer can review the situation, not just the AI's interpretation of the situation. And this does not mean every workflow becomes slow or bureaucratic, because some translations are low stakes. A meeting transcript becomes a task list. A product note becomes a searchable summary. A support article becomes a draft response. But other translations are different. A complaint becomes a severity level. A supplier disclosure becomes a risk classification. A medical note becomes a coverage signal. A security alert becomes an escalation priority. And a worker's concern becomes an HR case type. That is where accountability begins. Not over the final action, but over the meaning that made the action look reasonable. This is why the Tower of Babel metaphor works. Not because AI speaks too many languages, but because language can become organized power. In the enterprise, that power shows up when AI turns very different human situations into labels the system can process. That can make institutions faster, but it can also make them less accountable if the translation becomes invisible. So the choice is not technology or no technology. It is what kind of language layer institutions build and whether that layer preserves enough evidence for people to challenge what the system made executable. One path lets AI turn messy situations into clean labels too quickly. The other path keeps the source, the evidence, the uncertainty, and the alternative interpretations visible before the label starts moving the work. That is accountable language. And it is one of the most important enterprise AI disciplines we're not yet naming clearly enough. The danger is not that AI speaks. The danger is that institutions may let AI-generated meanings move work, decisions, and people before asking what context was compressed, what evidence was ignored, and who lost the chance to challenge the label. That is the kind of question this channel is built around. If that is the conversation you want more of, subscribe below. I publish weekly on the operating model, governance, and architecture choices behind accountable and sovereign enterprise AI.
The data flows, a constant stream, shaping futures, chasing every dream. Complex patterns and sights unseen, a new era, sharp and keen. The world is changing, can you feel the pulse? A deeper vision beyond every impulse. Enterprise, geopolitics, AI.